The lights dimmed, and the audience murmured in anticipation. 1,000 faces leaned forward as the next contestant walked onto the stage, a thin Filipino man in a faded white shirt, gripping the microphone like it was the only thing keeping him standing. His shoes were scuffed, his hands trembled, and his eyes carried stories of long nights and harder days. The judges exchanged uncertain glances, and Simon leaned back in his chair, unimpressed. "Name?" he asked flatly. "Carlos," the man whispered, his voice barely holding together. "I'll be singing Can't Help Falling in Love." A few people chuckled softly, an Elvis song. Too big, too classic, too dangerous for someone who looked so fragile. But then, he sang. And everything changed. The first note came out like a prayer, tender, pure, drenched in longing. The laughter stopped. His voice carried something no microphone could filter, a life's worth of hunger, heartbreak, and hope. As he sang, his trembling faded, replaced by quiet strength. The melody rose, filling the hall with something raw and sacred. By the time he reached the chorus, there were tears in the audience. Even Simon's expression softened, his eyes glistening as if remembering something long buried. When Carlos hit the final note, the silence was so deep it felt holy. Then, the golden buzzer exploded above him, raining gold confetti like blessings from heaven. Carlos froze, staring upward, hands trembling over his heart. Then he fell to his knees, tears streaming, whispering to himself, "Mama, we did it." The crowd roared, but Carlos didn't hear them. All he could see was his mother's face in his mind, the woman who had once told him, "One day, son, your song will feed more than your hunger." And tonight, it finally did. Backstage was chaos, flashes, microphones, and reporters shouting questions, but Carlos stood in the middle of it all, clutching an old phone like it was a lifeline. "Please," he asked softly, "can I call my mother?" When the call connected, a weak but loving voice answered, "You sang, my boy." Tears welled in his eyes. "I sang for you, Ma," he whispered. On the other end, nurses smiled through tears. Everyone in that hospital room knew how long she had been waiting for this moment. Carlos was never meant to be a performer. For years, he had been a janitor, mopping floors in the same theater where stars once stood. Each night after everyone left, he would sing softly while cleaning the empty aisles, his voice echoing through the seats like a secret prayer. Music was his escape from exhaustion, his way of reminding himself that dreams don't die just because life gets hard. One evening, a sound technician overheard him. Instead of mocking him, the man smiled and said, "You cleaned this stage for too long. It's time the stage gave something back." Without telling Carlos, he entered him into the auditions. That single act of kindness changed everything. Now, backstage, as golden confetti still shimmered in his hair, Carlos felt like his heart would burst. The applause, the lights, the fame, none of it mattered. What mattered was hearing his mother's voice say, "Son, you've given me a reason to keep breathing." He pressed the phone against his heart and closed his eyes, letting the sound of her fragile laughter mix with the echo of his song. "We're finally seen, Ma," he whispered. "After all these years, we're finally seen." The world saw a singer. But in that moment, Carlos was just a son fulfilling a promise. Overnight, Carlos became a worldwide sensation. His audition clip flooded social media, reaching millions within hours. Yet with fame came the storm. Some called him the voice of the people, while others doubted his story. Headlines questioned his past, and online comments turned cruel, accusing him of fabricating poverty for sympathy. Old classmates claimed he'd exaggerated his struggles. What began as admiration turned into suspicion. Through it all, Carlos stayed silent, focusing on his mother's recovery and the quiet peace of gratitude. But the rumors grew louder, and one day, a talk show invited him to set the record straight. The host leaned forward, eyes sharp. "Carlos, were you ever really poor?" The question hung heavy in the air. Carlos took a deep breath, reached into his pocket, and unfolded a small, crumpled photograph. "This is my mother," he said softly. "She washed clothes by the river every day so I could stay in school." The audience fell silent. The host had no words. Then, from the back row, an older janitor in uniform stood up, voice trembling. "He's telling the truth," the man said. "We worked together. He'd sing while we cleaned, and his voice made us forget our hunger." Cameras zoomed in on Carlos' face as tears streamed freely. The audience erupted in applause, not for celebrity, but for honesty. Simon later tweeted, "You can question a man's story, but never the soul behind his song." That message went viral, drowning out the hate with love. That night, Carlos looked at his reflection in a dark window and whispered, "Truth always sings louder." For the first time since the fame began, he smiled, not because the world believed in him, but because he never stopped believing in himself. Months passed, and the noise of fame began to fade. But one night, Carlos was invited back to perform on the same stage that had changed his life. This time, it wasn't about proving anything, it was about gratitude. Backstage, a hospital bed was carefully rolled in. His mother, frail but smiling, had insisted on coming. Doctors warned her heart was too weak, but she simply said, "I just want to hear my son sing one last time." When the lights dimmed, the audience gasped as she was gently wheeled beside the stage. Carlos took a deep breath, his eyes shimmering with emotion. The giant screen behind him lit up with videos sent in from around the world. Janitors, single mothers, and street singers holding signs that read, "Carlos made me believe again." The moment felt sacred. He stepped to the microphone, voice trembling. "This isn't just my song," he said softly. "It belongs to everyone who's ever been unseen." Then he began to sing "Can't Help Falling in Love Again," slower and deeper this time, as if each note carried a lifetime of gratitude. Midway through, he turned toward his mother. "Sing with me, Ma," he whispered. Her voice was faint, barely a whisper, but he could feel her presence joining his melody. The crowd stood, many openly sobbing. As the final note faded, Simon, moved beyond words, pressed the golden buzzer again, breaking every rule. Golden light filled the stage as mother and son embraced under the falling confetti. "For love," Simon said softly into his mic. "For every mother who believed when no one else did." The world wept with them, not just for the performance, but for the love that turned hardship into music, and pain into purpose. A year later, the cameras were gone, but Carlos' purpose had only grown brighter. He no longer sang for fame or applause, he sang for others. In a small rented building painted sky blue, he opened a modest music school called Golden Hearts Academy. Its mission was simple: to give children from humble families a chance to be heard. The walls were covered with donated instruments and framed photos from his journey, one showing the moment gold confetti fell as he wept on stage, another of his mother smiling proudly beside him. Beneath them hung a small brass plaque that read, "For Mama, who heard the song before the world did." One afternoon, a young boy entered timidly. His clothes worn, his eyes full of doubt. "Sir," he stuttered, I can't sing like you." Carlos knelt, smiling warmly. "Neither could I," he said gently. "Until someone believed I could." He placed a hand over the boy's chest. "Start from here." The child began to sing, off-key, trembling, but Carlos listened as though it was the greatest sound in the world. That evening, Carlos visited his mother's grave, laying down fresh flowers. "We did it, Ma," he whispered. "Now it's their turn." As the sun dipped below the horizon, he looked toward the sky, softly humming "Can't Help Falling in Love." And for a brief, tender moment, he felt her presence in the wind, her voice mingling with his. "You never fell, my son," she seemed to whisper. "You only rose." The screen faded to black as his melody lingered, a song not of fame, but of faith, love, and the legacy of a mother's belief.